It says it's being recorded. All right. Okay, we're approaching the maximum mark and the checking in has slowed down. I'm going to go ahead and mute you all. I will leave the chat window open on my screen so that if you do have a question, I'll try to respond to it. I may have to scroll back through those towards the end and see if I can find the questions. I'd like to try to get through everything. So, getting started, the purpose of this is to talk today about the outcome measure reporting for quarterly reports. We've done a lot. I've worked with Rob Reed, the Chicago consultant and employee of Healthy Families America, who does the work on the hard work on PIMS, and we've done a whole lot to improve the way that reporting is done in PIMS so that you guys have options for reporting just the events that were expected to take place in the quarter, and not the evaluation questions that we've asked for so many years about how many people are up to date with all their immunizations, with all their well baby visits, with all their ASQs, but to look at immunizations, well baby visits, and ASQs that occur within a particular time frame, whether it be a particular quarter or a particular fiscal year. I think Rob was getting quite tired of me by the end of the summer into August and September with getting in touch with him about questions. And there are still a couple of things which have not been completely resolved, unfortunately, and we're continuing to work on those. One shortcoming that's still a problem is within the supplemental system reports. Supplemental system reports are not able to exclude groups currently. So when you run a report, and there's only one report now based out of the supplemental system. No, I take that back. There are two reports. There's the DSS statistical report, which I'm not going to cover in detail today because that could be a whole webinar probably. But the prenatal care report, which I will talk about today, those reports cannot exclude people. So for the statistical report, it should not turn out to be too much of a problem, except where you're including things. If you're including people from some group that you're not tracking anything else on, you won't be able to exclude those numbers of assessments intakes for those people. What I suggest is that you run a PIMS system report that shows you that you can exclude people from, that shows you your enrollments or your assessments during that period, and subtract the people that should be excluded from that number on the statistical report. Right now, I know that's cumbersome, but It's difficult to get the supplemental system to access the people who are in a group at this point, and Rob is working to help me get that arranged. So we'll do that as soon as possible. I'm not certain I can get it out by the end of this month, but I'm working to try to. The other shortcoming that we just were alerted to today, in fact, was on the reports, in the PIMS system, the reports that for children and parents look at within normal outcomes, or I'm sorry, within normal limits outcomes, and that would be the home, the KIPS, the Piccolo, the Edinburgh, don't currently exclude people who are younger than 7 months. I had made the assumption and thought from the work that we did this summer when I reviewed things that it was excluding the younger people because you set the first cutoff to 7 months. But the within normal limits does not exclude those people at this point. So that, again, when I found that out this morning, thanks to one of our site managers, site directors, I contacted Rob, and Rob and I are going to look at that closer tomorrow and see if we can sort that out for the next iteration of PIMS 8. Okay, so we now have 21 people here. That's more people than I've ever had in a GoToMeeting before. So we will, at this point, I'm going to switch to showing my screen and start to are you seeing the PIMS 8 supplemental system? And I guess I need to unmute somebody to allow that. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Okay, there, I see in my audience view that that's what you guys are seeing, so good. Okay, before we do the actual reports, I want to spend a couple of minutes showing you some things that I need to, let's see, I can't get to that other page. Hang on a second. All right. I need to go over some things with you in terms of settings that have changed since the since the change over to PIMS 8. And these were discussed in the webinar that was done for you guys that I don't know how many people were able to get to, but it was the webinar on differences in PIMS 8. But it might not have made sense to you or made a connection for you at the time. In PIMS 8, you have your main menu, and you have the site definitions menu. So if you're following along on your own PIMS data and you want to go to the site definitions menu, the outcome instruments have some definitions that are necessary to effectively analyze data in some of the outcome reports now. You'll all remember probably that we've had for a long time cutoffs and for the risk factors that used to be on the standard reports menu. But Rob has now moved those into the individual outcome measures, and they need to be updated in your outcome measures so that it can look at within normal limits cutoffs effectively. For example, in the home, early childhood, you have the description of the home instrument, and on that there is now a box that says cutoff scores. Some instruments use the same cutoff at each time point. Some instruments use different cutoffs at each time point. I'm going to go through the instruments real quickly and show you which use which and how to set them. And if you want to write these down, you can then go and edit them in your own system so that your reports will work effectively. I'll also send out a list of these in the next day or two to make sure that you get them. Okay, so on the home early childhood, which is the second of the home done for the older children, you would set that as the same cutoff at each time point, set the cutoff score at 29, and set the normal range at or above the cutoff. The options for the normal score range are below the cutoff, which some instruments like the Edinburgh, the normal range is below 10. Others like the like this instrument, the home, like the ASQ, the cutoff, the normal range is above whatever the cutoff is, so a high score is better. Okay, so the cutoff for this is 29, and the normal is above that. If a child scores below 29, they're not within normal limits. When you look at the schedule, you'll see that because you checked same cutoff at each time point, those are auto-entered for you, and you don't need to enter anything here. Okay. For the infant toddler, same cutoff at each time point. It's a little lower than the early childhood. It's at 27 rather than 29. And again, it's at or above the cutoff, which would be reflected on the schedule of when that instrument should be applied for each family. For the KIPS, same cutoff at each time point. The cutoff score is 2.5. The normal score range, again, is at or above that cutoff. So below 2.5 is a low score and not within normal limits. Again, that's applied to each of the time points that that instrument is used at. The piccolo, which we're now switching to, is different cutoffs at each time point. If you remember, we sent out the document for setting that up, and the normal score range is at or above the cutoff at, and when you select that it is different cutoffs at each time point, nothing is entered in the cutoff scores. So you need to come into the cutoff score, or I'm sorry, nothing's entered into the cutoff scores on the schedule, so you need to come into the schedule and enter these cutoffs. 3 and 6 months, 31, 12 to 36 months, 32, and 48 and 60 months, 33. I'll give you a second to write those down so that you can edit your selections in your own home copy. Okay, so the other one that we have is the ASQ. And the ASQ, as you probably know, has a different cutoff score at each time point. It also has different cutoff scores for the different scales at different time points. So it's very complex in the way its cutoff works. Generally, the normal score range is at or above the cutoff. However, when you now go to the schedule, it may horrify you because there are a lot of time points and scales. The good news is that we're not using the ASQ within normal limits information for our outcome. We're only using the number of people who have received the ASQs as the major outcome for that. The secondary outcome of tracking people does look at the people who are suspect delays. However, if you remember on the outcome, the ASQ entry form, there is a checkbox next to the entry form for suspect delays. Currently, that is what is used still, as it always has been, for the tracking of whether a child has a suspect delay and to be used in the report on the suspect delays. So currently, you don't need to enter all of these, but Rob is working to have them be effective in the analysis of this data. And before that goes live to where that'll affect your reports, I will either I will get out to you a spreadsheet that has the numbers that go in here, or since it's not something that's up to the sites, it's up to the, it's the developers' standards and norms for those items, and they've got a grid of what the cutoff should be. I'm hopeful that Rob will be able to effectively enter those into the database for everybody for the next upgrade for PIMS, PIMS 8.4 when it goes live. But right now, this grid will not affect the outcomes that you're tracking and reporting on. Okay. I will send out the information on setting these, and most of your sites will have to have them set up, but I will, and I'll send you out a page that tells you what the cutoffs are for the home, each of the homes, the Kips, the Piccolo, and the Edinburgh. Okay, so that is the information on setting those for your analyses. When you do set them, you will probably get this right conflict. It doesn't make any difference really, but go ahead and click Save the Record, and that'll bring you back to the site definition menu. And then for reports, you would be going to the standard reports menu. Now, before we go to the standard reports menu for PIMS, I want to show you some data, the data analyses that are available on your outcomes in the supplemental system. Now, from the main switchboard of the supplemental system, you would go to HFV quarterly reports, which is a new category of reports in your newly updated supplemental system. The quarterly reports that are available from the supplemental system, or it's really just one report, pertains to the prenatal care data. Rob has not developed an analysis of the prenatal care information at this point, so we're still doing that in the supplemental system. You probably all are aware that there are two ways to enter your prenatal care information. When a participant has joined your program, accepted services, and enrolled and begun getting services, if they're in the prenatal period, one of the things that you'll be doing is to help them make sure that they make and get to their visits for the prenatal care. So one way of tracking prenatal care is to track it using the medical visits form in PIMS, which you get on the home form of any particular participant. You click on the medical visits and you can go in and enter the date of the visit, and under the purpose of the visit, note that as a prenatal care visit and make any notes that you need to about the visit. And each of those will be saved as a discrete prenatal care visit, and those will be tallied in the on the home form. You'll see a tally of the number of medical care visits that are expected from the time that they're opened, and the number of medical care visits that have been entered that you've shown that they've received. Okay. Currently, there's a small problem in that Rob used 37 weeks to calculate gestational age on that. So during the prenatal period, it will always be using the 37-week calculation, and it will look like they are earlier than you think they should be. But that will resolve when the actual birth date is entered on the birth information form and you enter gestational age. It can then actually, the gestational age of birth, it can then actually calculate what gestational age they were at enrollment and do the correct calculation. It's only as long as they're prenatal that there's any problem with those calculations. But prenatally, they won't be included in your report. It'll just look odd on their home form. Okay. The other way of collecting that information is that on the home form, next to the prenatal care calculations for medical visits, there are two override fields, one for expected and one for completed visits. So at birth, when you know how many visits they should have had from the time they enrolled to birth, you can enter the expected number of visits, and you should know how many visits they were able to make during that time from the time that they enrolled to the time the child was born, and you can enter that in the override. If you're really tracking medical visits well, you don't need to use the override. If you are not tracking individual medical visits, then you should be using the override to collect that information. So in creating the reports for this, I created options for each of those. Sites that are confident that they're tracking the medical visits well, and that's what they're using, should use the medical visits only report. Sites that are using the override only and are not collecting medical visits on an individual basis should use the override only. If you're not sure which one you're using, then I would recommend that you use the medical visits and override. And in this analysis, the override data takes precedence over the medical visits data. Let me run that for this data. And in order to get a large enough number of people in this data, I've expanded this to a broader date range. I expanded it to a year and a quarter rather than a quarter, because when I ran the most recent quarter, I found that it was just one person. So click OK. And that date range would be the date range that you want to look at for the most recent quarters. So in our case, that would be 7/1/17 and 9/30/17, give you the first quarter of this fiscal year. Okay, so what this provides you then is it says there are a total number of 17 prenatal enrollees. Remember that to be included in this analysis, they need to have had a month or more of service prenatally. If they came in the last 4 weeks of their gestation, of their pregnancy, they would not be included in this analysis and would not be included in this 17 enrollees. 8 of those had data. That's 47.06% of the 17. There's a note at the bottom of the page that says that if this number is less than 80%, you do not have a very good estimate of your actual population's prenatal care compliance because you have too few people. We generally set that if you want to have a good estimate, you need to have at least 80% of your participants with data. Okay. Now, that said, what we report is on the number of participants with data. So, although we have 8 participants who didn't have data, we have 8 who attained the objective, and we would report the 100%. The next section of the report gives you the breakdown of who was missing what, and 9 of these participants had no medical visits. That they would also not have had the override data, because if they had the override data, they would be included using the override data in this report. And then the bottom part of the report gives you a breakdown of the categories overall. So you've got 100%, 80 to 99%. Both of those categories, since the outcome is participants will have 80% or more of their expected visits, both of those categories attain the objective. And then you have at the bottom, if you had any people who had less than 80%, 79 or lower, they would be included here, and a total. Okay. If, as we do here, you have some missing people, we also have reports on missing data here. So you can look at the missing data medical visits here, and that shows the people in your who are prenatal who had missing medical visits. Now you'll notice that this report is more than the number of people total in that other report, and it goes back to people at the beginning of our date range for the supplemental system that we input on the front on the main switchboard. That's because while you guys may be interested in the people who are included in the date range, and I think that was 8 or 9 people, and would want to track their data down, and this has been de-identified so you don't know who these people are. Your data should not show up with these weird characters in it. While you might want to check the first people, and they're entered here or presented here in descending birth date range, you're going to be looking at the first 9 of these who are missing data, but the other people are going to affect your evaluation outcome. So if you have people who are missing those data from this report going back further, and you can track those people down and either enter the override or enter the medical visit information, you'll be helping yourself on the overall outcome report. So we wanted to present you with that information as well. Okay. So moving on now to the PIMS analyses. We talked about the settings that you need in the definitions, and now we're going to go to the actual reports and talk about what you need to do to set up your reports correctly and analyze your data correctly, or within the shortcomings that I mentioned at the first, at least within those parameters, you can report as well as you can, and that should be improved. Those last things should be improving soon as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is, if you're familiar with the PIMS 7 reports, you'll notice first thing that the site cutoff date has moved. It used to be down over here. And so you always need to make sure that the site cutoff date provides you a cutoff that is at or past the last information that you want to be able to report in the reports that you're running. It's useful to set that cutoff to be the last day of the reporting period that you're reporting for. That way you can duplicate that report at a later date by going into the reports and using that cutoff date again. If you always set the site cutoff date forward to today when you start to run reports, then you may be adding additional data into your report that happened after that site cutoff. And so you may get slightly different results as you go forward. And say, well, why I ran this report last week and I got this, and now I'm running the report this week and it's added 1 to 2 of the categories. Use the same site cutoff date and set that to the end of the period that you are reporting for, like the last day of the quarter that you're running the reports on. Okay, so the first thing that we want to look at the report for is medical providers by age 2 months. And that one is one that Rob worked on late and will still be working to improve. So it's kind of buried. And it's under the custom other states report category, and it's the medical providers by 2 months. I think you all should have gotten the document that I sent out this morning with the instructions for running all these reports. And in that, the first few steps are pretty much the same for every report. You want to check your site cutoff date. You want to select a report category in this window. you want to select the report that you're going to look at in the report window, but don't run it. Okay, each time you select a different report in this window, some of the parameters down here may change. So, and we're only in this particular window, we're only going to use the medical providers by age 2 months at this point. But every time you select a report, the parameters that are available to you can change. So always select the category, select the report, and then proceed with the next steps. Generally, you're not going to change anything in this first portion. You've got your site and you've got the site name here. You're not going to be changing that every time you run a report. But you might change whether you're including or excluding selected groups. If you want to run the report for a smaller group, or you want to exclude a group who doesn't qualify for this analysis, a group that you've set up. So you look at those, and then you go to this box, and if there's any parameters in here, you want to make sure that you, in this case, we're looking at children who were who reached 3 months, because we're looking at whether they had a medical provider by 2 months. You want to look at the children who reached 3 months in the period that you're looking at. So in this case, it would be, and this might give us too small. Let me leave that because we have small groups of people here. But for your purposes, these numbers would be the quarter, the current quarter that you're looking at. Sorry, 2017. And I've just expanded, instead of going with 7/1/17 here, I've gone to the first of the year, so it pulls in more people to the report. Now for this particular report, that is all of the parameters that you can set. That'll change with other reports. You then click the preview report. What number that I entered? Sorry. $930, not $931. All right. Now, in creating some of these reports, Rob has used basis of other reports, so there are some things that don't apply. And if it talks about the North Dakota McVie report, that doesn't pertain to us. That's just the template that he based this on. So the total active population is children turning 3 months old during this quarter. That, in this case, is also the active overall denominator, the children turning 3 months in this quarter. So those are the same number, 100%. Okay. The important number on this report is this that is headed standard construct, which is described as children with medical providers by age 2 months. And in this case, 21 of the children in the program who reached 3 months of age during this quarter had a medical provider by that time. So this box is what you would report on your in your outcomes to DSS. You would report the N as 21, the number is 21, and the percentage is 100%. Right? Okay. The next report, you're selecting now from child outcomes, and selecting the well baby visits summary. Important to remember, and most of you probably remember from PIMS 7 reports, that there are often two kinds of reports. And where it says well baby visits, it's going to be a report for individual children. Where it says well baby visits summary, it'll be a report that summarizes categorically the percentage of kids attaining different levels on that. Okay, so we selected child outcomes, we select well baby visit summary, we look over here, we're leaving VA 023 as the site. Again, we want, for all of these outcome reports quarterly, we want to look at people who were active in the date range. That includes people who were who enrolled before the date range, but who were still active within the date range. So that selects the people. We're only looking at target children. We're looking at those for all staff members who are served by all staff members, but you could look at individual staff if you want. This box now limits this to the well baby visits that occurred, and you want it to be in the same period. Okay, so people who are active in 7 to 9, and children who are active 7/1 to 9/30. Well baby visits that were due in that period. If you remember, I mentioned that one shortcoming of some of the reports was that it doesn't start when the kids have reached 7, which is what our outcomes specify. This allows us to specify 7 months as the minimum age for which we're looking at the children. We selected way back in evaluation days the 7 months as a good place to say, okay, by this time families should be stabilized, they should be getting what they're supposed to get, and that as an outcome of their of the service that we're giving them, this is a good time to start to look at it. So for this report, you would set the minimum child age to 7 months. Be careful, though, because this parameter box of other filters is used on some other reports and not used as the age of the child. So when you're reporting, make sure that you're cognizant of what this says here and whether 7 months or 1 month or something else is the appropriate filter that you want to use. Okay, so we set those all up, and we run this. And I don't know if this site, I haven't run this report, so I don't know if this example has any people with actual, nope. These folks, the site's probably not recording each well baby visit as they occur, and to my knowledge, that is still considered an optional outcome. But if your site is reporting that, that's the way that you would set it up. Okay. The next is the birth outcome for child's birth weight. And you go to the birth outcomes group of reports, category of reports, you go to the birth outcome summary here, and when you click that, then you're provided with a set of parameters. You want to look at just the births that occurred in the same period that you're reporting for. So I'm going to leave this to 1 because there's so few in this data set, but I'm going to look at those people who were active during the time period. Normally you would set these for the same period, and I may run it a second time. Now, here's what I was talking about this filter being used as the same for different reports and filtering different variables. In this case, it's prenatal enrollment. If you left the 7 here, you would only be looking at those people who had 7 months of enrollment prenatally. I think for most sites that would reduce you to almost nothing, almost no cases. Our standard has always been that they're enrolled at least 1 month. We don't set a minimum number of home visits before birth as a standard, so you can leave that as 0. And that means anybody who had a home visit, they're enrolled, they'd be included in this. Okay, so you run that, and for our purposes for reporting, we're looking at the percentage of children who were 2,500 grams or greater, and we exclude any missing data, so we use the valid column here, and you would report that of 6 children with data, 5 were 2,500 grams or greater, and that's 83% of the children, prenatal children participating in that quarter, or born in that quarter. Okay. Next, back to the child outcomes and down to the immunization data. Okay, we have an immunization summary, and we have an immunization summary reflecting medical advice. If you have children who you record as not receiving particular immunizations because they were recommended not to by the doctor, then use the immunization summary reflecting medical advice, and it will eliminate those particular immunizations and calculate their record minus that number of immunizations that the doctor had skipped on medical advice. Otherwise, just use the immunization summary and let's see. No, I'm sorry. For this report, use either the immunizations due within a date range or the immunizations due within a date range reflecting medical advice. And hang on. We want to set here the minimum age of the child to be 7 months as we did previously. When it's minimum child age available to set as a filter, always use 7 months for that because that's been our standard for ages. And then this will look at within this date range the immunizations that were due in that date range, and you can run either the date range or the date range reflecting medical advice. I'll run the date range here. I'm sorry. Need to run the summary, not the Yeah. Immunizations acquired at age 1 or 2. Between. Right. The immunization summary. Sorry, just confused myself there. So this is run as the immunization summary, includes target children with immunizations due in that date range, and looks at the immunizations due within that date range and only those immunizations due. And so in this date range for this site, there were 4 children with immunizations due, and we use the completed, which is up to date, not on time, because on time is more stringent criteria. We use the completed, and in this case, 2 of the children were up 100% up to date at the in that quarter with the immunizations that were due in that quarter. Okay, so that's the immunization summary, or the immunization summary reflecting medical advice. Next, the child outcomes that we look at would be the child outcome checkpoints within the date range. This is the report that you run to examine the outcome for completion of ages and stages. That's the main thing that you're looking at on this report, because it's whether they got the report done within the specified date range that you look at down here. So we're looking at all the children who are presumed active between these date ranges. This would be your last quarter. Run the summary, and if we don't have enough people for it to make sense, it makes sense, but it's still a few people. We have 3 children eligible in this period on the ASQ. We look at the up-to-date rather than the on-time, again, just because on-time is too stringent. And we look at the percentage completing all screens that were expected during that period. So your 3 children were eligible. All of them had at least 1 screen, and all of them in this case had 100% of what was expected during the period. Okay, now I say that the main thing on this report that you're using it for is this ASQ summary piece, and that's important. Why do we include the KIPS and the piccolo? Because you want to know what percentage of the people are receiving the KIPS or piccolo or any other measure that would be used and would occur in here. Because, as I said before, if you're not getting 80% of the participants that you're expected to get, at least at this level of getting some screens, you're not getting a real accurate accounting of what your program looks like and what the participants look like. So when you go from this to whether they're within normal limits or not, if you're only looking at 30% of your participants, then even if all 30 of those are within normal limits, that's not a good representation of your site's ability to get people within normal limits on that, because you don't know what 70% of your people look like. Okay, so that's a validity issue. If you don't have most of your people measured, then you aren't sure that you have a valid estimate of what your people look like. But for reporting quarterly, this is the line that's important, and it's this percentage people out of this number of people eligible. Okay, the other aspect of child development that we have to look at is if they are at risk, if they show a suspect delay, are we referring them? And I will definitely make this a larger date range for this. See if we get any numbers on here. Currently, this little parameter value will pop up, but it will not affect your report. It's one of those nagging little things that Rob's got to figure out where that's coming from, but it does not change your data. You can leave it blank, click OK, and it provides your report. Okay. Most of you have seen a report similar to this in PIMS 7. This one has been slightly improved to help us with our representation of what we're doing. 12 children received ASQs. One of those had a suspect delay. That's 8% of the 12. Of the one with a suspected delay, none were referred for further assessment. Okay. Since we had none referred for further assessment, we wouldn't expect any to be confirmed, and we wouldn't expect any to be receiving services, which you also have to track if you've referred them. What we've added to this report now that the previous report did not have is the reason not referred. So in this case, you have one child with a suspect delay was not referred, and it indicates down here that that one child, the family did not give permission. We've considered that to be a valid reason for not making a referral, and in fact, our standard states that of those children with suspect delays with parental permission, referrals were made. So in this case, since the family did not give permission, there were no children with both a suspected delay and parents' permission. So your result here is that there were no suspect delays that needed referring for this quarter, and that would be what you would enter in your box on the quarterly report. Okay, so you subtract the number in the reason not referred from the number of children with suspected delays to do the calculation of what percentage got with delays got a referral. Okay, then we have just two more reports to do for your quarterly reporting to DSS. And one is under the children. That's this one, the child outcome scores within normal limits. That's going to pull for the presumed active participants the outcome scores for those participants for outcomes that they were assessed on during the period you select. Okay, so this shows that 8 children received the piccolo. Of those, 4 of them were old enough to be looked at the first checkpoint, and two of those were, and actually it isn't. It's 2 of those 4, but it's not looking at 7 months, unfortunately, at this point. That's the one that we have to, that and the parent outcome we have to revise, so it only includes the people who have reached 7 months in this analysis. But this indicates that of the people receiving the tool, half of them were within normal limits. Remember that normal limits rating is based on their definitions that we reset at the beginning of this for the piccolo, that depending on their age, they should have a score of 30, 31, or 32 as they get older. Okay, so it only looks at outcomes that were measured during that time period. Okay, and for the last one, it's a similar report, but it's under the parent outcomes, and that is parent outcomes within normal limits, summary, same period, and that gives you the Edinburgh and what percentage were within normal limits, and the home infant toddler, what percentage of those were within normal limits at the last tool administration. All right. Okay, so I'm going to put back on my everybody's audio. And get somebody feeding back here. You haven't been hearing that the whole time, have you?
No.
Okay, good. All right, so if anybody has any questions at this point, I see one question at the bottom, and I don't know when it was asked. If Annalise is still here, is that data triggered by PIMS data entry? I don't see that Annalise is still here, so I'm not sure what that question was. It came in the last 5 minutes, but I'm not sure what she was asking. Can we exclude transfers and re-enrollments for the immunizations report? Okay. Let's go back to child outcomes.
Why would you want to do that?
Immunization summary. Yes. Exclude transfers and re-enrollments as long as they've been marked that on their assessment form via this checkbox. Okay. Hi, Annalisa. ASQ referral form. Is the reason not checkbox triggered by PIMS data entry. Yes, on the in PIMS, on the ASQ form, when you're entering ASQ data, you're entering the scores there, and you're next to the scores, there's a checkbox that says suspect delay. When you check that suspect delay, it brings up, it makes hot the, okay, I'm going to remute everybody here, and go ahead and put your questions in the box. I thought people would ask their questions, but but do it slowly so I can make sure I can keep up with them. So you check the box that a delay was suspected, and a referral form becomes hot at the bottom of the page. If you do not make a referral, then on that referral form you have to use the window that says why you did not make a referral. Okay, and that should then show up in your reports. And everybody's muted. More questions? Okay. Going once. Give slow typers a chance to type a question in. Well, I hope you all got the PIMS reporting document that I sent this morning. If you haven't checked your email, check that. If you didn't receive it, let me know, because I think that it pretty clearly goes over what I did. Wait a minute, I'm now getting a couple more questions. I'm not sure, Kendra, what you mean by, is there a reason it wouldn't let me override some of my prenatal appointments?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I went in because I pulled up the report of missing prenatal appointments and went to do one of them, and it wouldn't let me put anything in that box. And it had historically, so I wasn't sure if maybe it's just something with that particular one or if anybody else was having that issue.
I hadn't seen that issue happening. I will look at some data. Let me make a note of this. I don't know if there's something that Rob did, but I'll check it.
Okay. And it was a child that was recently born. I think he was born in September.
Well, if you've got his birth form in there and everything,
yeah,
you should be able to enter those, to my knowledge.
Okay.
But I will check that.
My other question was, I know you said that the site cutoff date should always be like the last day of your quarter, and maybe it was just a odd accident. Stuff that I had entered for that quarter after, so like if I put it in October 10th, but it was data from September, it doesn't always show up.
Okay. What I recommend then is that you use the date the measure was done, not the date you're entering the date on.
Okay.
As the date. So when family support workers are using data forms to record things, they should be recording a date that they're doing them. And rather than let forms that you're entering default to today's date, use the date that they completed them. And that should help with that problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, let me go back here a couple. I think I missed a question or two. Did Rob get back with you regarding the 2-month medical provider issue? No. Sorry, Lisa, I neglected to ask him about that. I will look at that myself, and I will ask Rob about that as well, and get back to you on that one. Anybody else? I think. Okay. Another. Yes, I will send the outcome instrument settings out to you. Okay. The question was asked, my Piccolo report shows up on the same report as the ASQ. It does, but that's the count of how many people did it, not the count of within normal limits. So you have to use the outcome scores within normal limits summary. Say that the report that looks at outcome checkpoints will give you how many people did it, but it does not look at how many were within normal limits on that on whatever instrument it is. The one that shows you which the within normal limits is the child outcome scores within normal limits summary, and it does not include the ASQ. So you have to look at both of those reports because they're answering two different questions. Okay, looks like that's the questions that I've gotten at this point. So I appreciate you all attending and hope this was helpful. And of course, as you know, I'm available for questions and assistance. And I know that there's a variety of people who are new in positions and haven't gotten training. So sometime in this quarter, before the end of the year, I'll assess what we need for training new people for sites and try to arrange a couple trainings. But it is the busiest time for me because I'm doing the annual reporting now, and I can't promise that I'll get those in before Christmas. Might have to be an early New Year's present. So thank you all for coming, and be well. Get me your questions if you have some, and I'll get more information out to you on those settings. Thanks.